Why do cities matter in a post-pandemic world?
How should cities embed resilience into their actions?
And what do cities need to do to reach net zero in the next 10 years?
Can actions such as nature-based solutions help us decarbonize our cities?
And how do cities genuinely plan for a fully inclusive and accessible future for all of their citizens?
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Hi. Delighted to be here with you today. Looking forward to discussing with you the need and importance of taking an integrated and holistic approach in designing and planning our cities. Can you tell me a little bit more about your role in Arab?
So I lead the global cities planning and design portfolio, which brings together all of our expertise around city planning, architecture, design, economics, transport planning, to really create an integrated offer that we can take to our clients to help them with the challenges they're facing in the cities they work.
And why are we focusing on cities?
Well, cities are, hugely important to the global economy in terms of economic activity. It's also where the vast majority of people are choosing to live, but they also have huge kind of challenges, but also opportunities. And we're dealing with cities across the world of, varying sizes and ages and different kind of typologies. So this is a really important place for us to work with our clients who are invested in cities, whether they're city authorities, whether they're leading cities as politicians, whether they're investors in cities, or whether they're communities who are living in cities. So it's a really important place for us to kind of bring our skills together to help solve the challenges that cities are facing for the future.
You mentioned challenges, and many cities really correlate with these challenges. In your view, what's the opportunity for cities today?
So traditionally, it may be that a city had a particular challenge that required a particular response. But now the problems are much more connected. They're much more kind of systematic across the whole of the city system. So we need to provide an integrated solution. So a great example of that is something like net zero, where many cities have made commitments to get to net zero by 2030, 2040. And the way to solve that means you need to look across a whole range of city systems, including building design, energy, transport, which means we need to bring all of those disciplines together to work in that way. But we're also seeing in cities our clients becoming much more integrated as well.
It's interesting you say that, because I feel like big agendas like net zero, decarbonization, or resilience truly bring these departments together. I remember when I worked on resilience, urban resilience, developing resilience strategies, we always felt that, cities and city governments, as you say, they were kind of really siloed in their departments. But one of the main things we try to do with a client is to try and think about, is there like such a team as a team that cuts across all the departments and coordinate the work with them?
It's something we're doing in our sort of internal project teams about how we bring the people together and work in an integrated way. But also in the work that we do with our clients, we often find ourselves in that kind of convening role where we're the ones that are bringing people around the table to focus on that kind of common goal or that kind of single outcome that they're dealing with. So having that kind of understanding of sort of the big picture, but also being able to kind of bring together all the different components that can help respond to that is a really important part of what we do.
And do you have any examples of projects that we're working on globally in relation to some of these outcomes or challenges we're talking about, be it decarbonization, net zero, resilience? Do any projects come to mind?
Yeah, there's some really great examples at the moment, and I think lots of cities are in a period of time where they're thinking about the future. We've had all of the challenges of the last 2 years around the pandemic, from a health perspective, from a broader societal perspective, but also the economic shocks that have come from that. And people now are thinking differently about what they want from their city. They think more about quality of life, access to open space, the quality of that urban experience. So we're talking to city authorities who are responding to that, thinking, what is the future of our city? So for example, in Sydney, we've been working with the businesses and the authorities in Sydney, thinking about the future of the downtown part of central Sydney, thinking about what function that needs to play to bring people into the city, to attract business, to create new activity, but also to kind of like set the standard for how Sydney's going to develop long term in the future. We've done similar work in London, looking at the future of the financial district post-pandemic. And we're working in Auckland at the moment in New Zealand, thinking about how they want to use transport infrastructure to completely transform how the city relates to each other. So using the investment in a new light rail network, not only to improve conditions for people moving from A to B, but to solve the city's housing problems, to solve the decarbonisation strategy, to create opportunities to connect communities together, to allow people to have access to better jobs. So increasingly our clients are thinking about cities in a very integrated, holistic way, and often using a project, an infrastructure idea as the catalyst for delivering that change. We're seeing this alignment now between what the policymakers in cities want to achieve, so the politicians, and the policy which is very clear about net zero, about social value, about what direction they want the city to go in, with where investors want to go as well. So that sort of, everyone is now on the same page around that. So there's a real opportunity to align that ambition around policy with investment to deliver positive change on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And also, other projects, one project that I'm working on, which I find quite unique, is that, the city of Tirana in Albania, they're investing in a forest, financing a forest to actually decarbonize the city. So it's kind of unique, right, to kind of help the city decarbonize, address carbon sequestration, flood mitigation. And I think we're going to see more of that in the coming years.
Absolutely, and those cities that are more ambitious, perhaps more creative around their plans to decarbonise and how they use nature-based solutions like rewilding and reforesting, might be the cities that investors want to invest in, because it says something about the values of that city, about the quality of life, and they're the places that people might choose to live and want to be. So when we talk about livability, and the way we've measured livability in the past, maybe that's all changing as well. So those kind of investments and policy decisions could be the real drivers of the global cities of the future.
And I heard that Arab is doing something on gender. I don't know if you want to say something about the research that we're doing. Yeah,
we're doing some fantastic research at the moment with the University of Liverpool and the UNDP.
That's right.
To look at the design of cities from a women and young female perspective, thinking about how we design cities to be safer, to feel safer, to be more inclusive. And this follows a series of kind of tragic events that we've seen, quite close to home here in London, but really thinking about how we design cities with safety in mind, from the quite micro to the kind of more macro policy decisions. And the way we're doing that research with those really strong partnerships, we're engaging with the public, with different groups to get their views on how they feel about this. So using that kind of access through social media to different networks, to different groups, to really sort of gather different perspectives so we can bring that into our research and thought leadership. And what we want to do is to use that kind of research to have conversations with cities about things they could be doing differently, and by connecting one city with another city where good things are happening, to create that network of cities where they can share knowledge and experience.
And I think another really important thing that I'm seeing more of is the role of people in our projects. Outcomes for people as well as outcomes for the planet. How are we integrating kind of people, and how should we be thinking about people within our projects?
Well, I think there's much more kind of awareness now from city planners, from city leaders, that they have a plan for their city that engages people. And all cities have immense diversity in terms of their population and in terms of the demographics and how cities are changing. So understanding those distinctive characteristics of cities, some of the challenges within that, understanding how cities are performing today, how some people feel excluded from cities, that don't benefit from the opportunities in cities, is a really important part of what they do. So really putting people at the heart of the design process. And to do that, we need to have better evidence, we need to have better data, we need to have better relationships with partners in cities, whether it's community groups or other organisations that we work with. And I think it forces us as well as an organisation to think about what we know and what we don't know, and who we need to work with to help fill some of those gaps. We have access to a whole range of specialists in Arup, but sometimes for us it's really important that we partner with other organisations. They can bring something that's complementary to our expertise, but also they know something that we don't, or they have a different perspective. And when we're dealing with these kind of complex, kind of multi-layered challenges in cities, often we have to bring people with us. So increasingly we're working with kind of smaller companies, with specialists, with universities, with research organisations, different organisations that we can bring together as part of our team to help solve those challenges.
Earlier on, you spoke about population increase in cities, and what do you think about how should cities cope with this level of urbanization and the rate they're urbanizing at?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because we're seeing a series of challenges and shocks that cities are facing around the world as well. Clearly, we've seen the shocks of the pandemic over the last couple of years, but we're also seeing shocks caused by extreme weather, kind of economic shocks or politically induced shocks. So it's really important that as cities kind of grow and expand and urbanize very quickly, that they have plans to become more resilient as well, so they can adapt and they can deal with those shocks as and when they happen. So we do a lot of work with cities through partnerships with Resilient Shift, looking at how cities can become more resilient and the approach that they need to take, both in terms of urban governance, how they sort of plan and how they organise around those potential events, but also investments they need to make in city infrastructure to become more resilient for their growing populations.
It's a really good point you make about this resilience, because also it really disrupts the most vulnerable. And again, this is the point you made earlier about equitability and equity when we design and plan cities, which is a really important point. The other question I had is, you talked about how do we bring people along and putting people at the center of design and planning. And we've seen, pre-pandemic, but during the pandemic, and even more so now, how different uses and interventions are being tested and trialed in our cities. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes maybe they failed. I wonder what thoughts you had about that in terms of bringing people along.
Yeah, we've seen some fantastic kind of innovations in cities where, partly in response to some of the restrictions imposed by the pandemic, we've seen cities kind of reimagine their public spaces, their streets, create opportunities for events, for pop-ups, for thinking about reusing buildings in different ways. And those cities that are, proving to be more successful, more resilient, and more attractive for people to live in are those cities that are prepared to take those risks and to take the opportunity to be creative, to try new things, to be a test bed for new ideas. And there are always going to be changes that impact on cities. We see that in the sort of economics of cities, whether it's in terms of changing retail, changing demand for office space, changing use of infrastructure, and that can mean bits of the cities need to find a new life, and they need to adapt and respond and change, otherwise they become redundant. So those cities that are constantly reimagining, working with different partners, embracing that change and prepared to work with different organisations to try new things, are those cities that are proving to be the most exciting, but also those places where people kind of want to invest and live in the future. And some of the things we've seen, through meanwhile uses, where we take a piece of land or we take a building, fantastic, examples where we've got bits of old road infrastructure or old department stores that are no longer in use, that have been converted into other flexible spaces, sometimes on a temporary nature, but just to sort of like reimagine the city, to bring people in, to create new opportunities for people to visit, but also for new businesses to try new things. That's a really important part of keeping cities fresh and alive, and there needs to be a really important place for that in kind of city planning and development, because those cities that do that will be the successful cities of the future.
And I think to your point earlier about resilience, I think we've also seen that a lot of buildings, stadiums, or open spaces during the pandemic have been, transformed into makeshift hospitals. So, this is also a type of kind of temporary use that really helped us, get through the pandemic. So kind of thinking about this flexibility of design and making the spaces work harder, our spaces that we don't use maybe on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think, and with all the challenges that the pandemic has introduced for people on many levels, the agility in some cases that has happened, and decisions that have been taken very quickly to close streets, to create spaces for businesses to put tables on the street, to convert buildings from one use to another. Sometimes these things have taken an awful long time to make happen, longer than they should do. But because we've been operating under these very sort of unique circumstances, those decisions have been taken very quickly. So that kind of agility, that ability to make decisions quickly, to react, to respond, to try new things, I think is a really important legacy we need to take from the pandemic into the future as cities kind of continue to evolve, because we're always going to have these kind of economic shocks, environmental shocks. So if we don't have the ability to react and respond quickly, then cities will start to die and be less relevant. So that agility that you described, Dima, I think is a really powerful thing that we want to, to hold on to and take forward into the future.
And one of the things we looked at we did a publication for the Greater London Authority on the role of meanwhile use in delivering resilience for the city, and it was launched during the pandemic, so it couldn't be more timely than that. And one of the things we were arguing is that sometimes we have a temporary use and then you create a community around it and you deliver social value, but when this temporary use goes away, what happens to that community that we have created? So we were kind of advocating the importance of leaving, maybe legacy is not the right term, but leaving some form of a legacy for the community to actually continue with that use, even when actually maybe physically it's not there, but to kind of empower them to take that forward.
Yeah, it's a really important point, because if cities of the future are going to be much more kind of reactive, and we're going to trial new things, and they're going to be there for a few years while something sort of develops and then moves to another part of the city, we need to constantly think about the point you're describing about what we leave behind, making sure there's a positive legacy, people benefit from it, it creates opportunities for local people, local businesses to benefit. So having that constant eye on the kind of impact of what we do and how you sort of lock in the benefits of that is a really important part of the planning work that we increasingly do with our clients, but also thinking, making sure we've got the mechanisms in place to make sure, we lock in those benefits in the long term.
Yeah, I know there's lots of questions I want to ask you, Richard, but I know that we have to come to an end of this conversation. Do you live in a city? Do you live in London?
I live in London. So I've lived in London for, nearly 30 years now with my family. Yeah.
So what kind of future do you want to see for your children in the city?
That's a really good question. So I have two daughters. So I have an 18-year-old who's just gone to university and a 16-year-old. So for me, the research we're doing around safety for women is really important to me personally, because as a parent of any children, but particularly daughters, you do sort of feel some of the concerns and the nervousness around safety at night.
And a couple of years ago, we've done this piece of work in Belfast looking at how can we redesign the city centre to attract families back, because a lot of families had left the city centre. And one of the ways we did it is actually to look at it through a child's lens. So if tomorrow you want to design a city through a child's lens, actually all the issues we're talking about today will actually be resolved, right? Maybe less pollution, more green space, better buildings, etc. So I think this point that you're making about inclusivity and thinking about women and also children and other kind of maybe aging population as well is crucial and kind of make us.
Yeah, but also living in a city that feels a place that people want to stay. People will always kind of choose to kind of move in and out of cities because that suits their lifestyle. People pass through cities, they spend time there, they move on. That's fantastic, because that's constantly kind of introducing diversity, kind of new experiences, new perspectives. But also people shouldn't feel like they have to leave a city because either they can't afford to live there anymore or because it doesn't offer the opportunities for them. And we see real pressures in cities like London, like New York, where the cost of living in cities for young people is a real challenge and can be a real barrier for them choosing to stay there if they want to. So for me, creating opportunities for people to stay in cities if they want to do that. So a range of accessible, affordable housing, connected to good, safe public transport, but also cities that feel clean as well. We've had significant challenges around cities globally around air quality and pollution over the last 10 years. We're seeing quite significant improvements in that, particularly in European cities, due to restrictions around diesel vehicles. That's fantastic, but we've got lots more to do. So for me, one of the priorities we have is to make cities healthier as well, and tackling air pollution is one of the easiest things that we could be doing to address that.
Well, Richard, thank you so much. Hopefully this is one of many Great to
Great.
have this
Really
conversation
good to chat,
with you.
Dima. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thanks.